Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tiggre. Our victim of the day is Scott Berdahl. He's co-founder of Snowline Gold. It's a brand new exploration play looking for gold up there in the Yukon that a lot of my readers have asked about. So I figured it'd be a public service to drag Scott into the pit here and ask him some questions. So Scott, why don't you give us an overview and then I've got a few questions for you.
Sure. Well, thanks, Lobo. Snowline Gold, as you said, is a new company, and we're based up in the Yukon territory, in a part of the territory that I think is very prospective, and others would agree, called the Selwyn Basin. We have about 72,000 hectares up there, covering a variety of gold deposit types, or prospective gold deposit types, that we've been working on for decades, actually, in some cases. Although we're a new company, my father and I, as prospectors, were putting together this package for the past 30 years, and so we're really excited to have assembled a very strong team around it and assembled solid financing behind us. And this is kind of the summer that we've been waiting for decades to go and test out these ideas.
Well, it's a pithy overview, so you're kind of segueing naturally into a question I had. Obviously, I noticed the names on the board, technical advisors, your own name, Nicholas's name. I assume Nicholas is related to Paul. Ron is your father. And you, went out kicking rocks with him when you were still in diapers or something? You look pretty young, my friend. How is it that you have decades of experience here?
Oh, that's, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I was dragged through black flies and mosquitoes and so on for decades in the Yukon bush. And gradually, I think there must be some kind of like Stockholm syndrome or something, but I came to like it. So but when the time came, I went into geology myself. But my father's a prospector. He started prospecting in the Yukon in the late 80s, and I was born up and raised up here as well. From a very young age, accompanied him on trips all over the Yukon. And actually, the oldest Snowline project, not geologically, but at least in terms of exploration, is called Tiggre, and he first staked that in 1988. It's been kind of a slow and steady progression over those years. He's had successes in other areas, and throughout that, I've been involved too, and got to know first the rocks of the Yukon and these properties and others, and then went elsewhere and gained a lot of experience in the industry and internationally, and came back to basically push these projects to the next level.
All right. So I guess one way of looking at that is that we have seasoned hands on your shoulders looking over and making sure that you and Nicholas don't mess up.
Yeah, you could certainly say that. We've got a pretty strong roster behind us. I know we're both fairly young, and this is new territory for both of us, but we're both pretty keen, so we bring a lot of energy, and kind of directing that energy, we have a panel of advisors. Our chair is Craig Hart, who most recently was the head of MDRU at UBC. We have Nicholas's father, Paul Matisik, who has his track record speaks for itself amongst people familiar, and he's sold something ridiculous, like I won't even guess, I can't count that high, but like 5 or 6 companies over the past decade in a series of just very impressive transactions. So we're really excited to have gotten them on board, and we also have from the ESG side, Sarah Weber, who has done a lot of work in British Columbia and is proving invaluable, helping out with the team. And last but not least, I've known Quentin Henning for quite a few years, and he is, I don't understand his bandwidth. He seems to be superhuman in terms of what he does, but he has been great for helping to advance these projects and even see the value in them over the years, and getting them to where they are today. And he's always just a text message away. So
yeah, I don't want to beat the team to death, but that's always a question of mine these days, because you see Quentin's name popping up left and right, and one has to wonder, how much. I mean, he's clearly an inspired geologist, but how much of his time and talent do you actually get to draw on?
Um, that's a great question, and I was kind of I've been dreaming about Snowline for a long time. The doldrums kind of made that so, and I've had Quinton Pegg to help out with it for a long time too. And so I was kind of dismayed to see, okay, his time is really getting eaten up by all these other projects over the past few years as things started to ramp up again. But so far, he's been amazingly responsive. He's an advisor, so we come to, like, I take information and so on to him for sort of big picture discussions. But he's always a text message away, very quick to respond to things, and then we sit down a few times a month and go over data, and he somehow seems to have plenty of time. I honestly wish I knew his secret.
All right. Well, we'll get to the rocks in a moment. But first, recent history. What happened exactly in March? Was that an RTO? What was Sky Ledger, and how did it become Snowline Gold?
Yeah, Sky Ledger was basically a shell on the Canadian Securities Exchange, and it was an RTO with my father and my private company called, very poetically, 18526 Yukon Incorporated. And so we had gone through with Keith Newmeyer, who's an investor and a resource to draw from. We had gone through with him. I'd pitched the idea of Snowline to him, and we kind of combed it down to what we saw as the biggest projects in our portfolio, which includes not the Snowline portfolio, but the 18526 portfolio includes tungsten, base metal projects, silver projects, and so on. And to make Snowline, we pulled out the large-scale gold projects, what we saw as having district-scale potential, multi-million ounce deposit potential, and rolled those into a private vehicle that was then the subject of the RTO.
All right, and that was Sanoa, or however you pronounce that, or?
That's right, that's Sanoa.
All right, and so Sanoa gets paid in the future for certain milestones. Does that mean you get paid in the future for those milestones, or how does that work?
Happily it does. It's almost like this Sanoa and 18526 were, the private companies that my father and I started, and so my role in Snowline is both enthusiastic founder and cheerleader and thing doer, but also I'm, on the other hand, it's kind of like a management transition from I know these projects very well. I've worked on them for, in some cases, now 30 years, but in other cases, the past decade, and I've been right from the inceptions of the projects. So yes, I do have that role. I'm kind of the prospector who has had that success, and so I'm in a very fortunate position there. But that success will really only come to fruition if Snowline is a success, and so that's my goal now.
All right, well, it's one way of looking at it. The skin in the game question I always ask at the end of the interview. You've contributed to projects, so you have a significant stake via that, if nothing else. More on that in a minute. Just before we wrap up with the deal, was there a share rollback at that time? Because you have a really tight share structure now.
There was not a share rollback at the time. No, it was a fairly new shell or new corporate vehicle, and it kicked around for a few years, sort of looking for a purpose, and so it came purpose-built to us, or we came purpose-built to it, I suppose.
All right, and so you vend these properties into Snowline, and you get involved, and you have this new company. Why now? Or if these projects are any good, why didn't you sell them to somebody, or why didn't you do this in the last uptick?
And so we did. Our flagship projects, Rogue and Einerson, are largely products of the last big uptick of 2010, 2011. During that time, we were poking around both. So Rogue is a series of plutons with some intrusion-related gold targets around them. Sort of a Fort Knox style environment, and we were poking around there, and then recognized in around 2008 that these rocks could have Carlin style potential as well. And we were very fortunate to have another company that made a very good name for themselves with the same idea, called Attack Resources, and they made a big drill discovery up to the northeast in 2010, and so we were able to kind of before we couldn't get anyone excited about that idea. It was just too outlandish, no strong evidence for it, just a couple of prospectors saying, here's what we think, and that's pretty easy to shrug away. But once Attack made their discovery, we were very well positioned to basically pick up all the targets between where we were looking at the time and between where they made their discovery. And so we had that kind of intel then. And so to get back out of the weeds towards your question, we actually optioned the Rogue project, those intrusions, to a company called Golden Predator in 2010. They had a good look. And these were boom times. There are some interesting stories that relate to that we can touch on over a beer sometime. But we ended up picking up about 5,000 claims. In the Yukon, a claim is about a quarter of a square kilometer. So, just back the envelope there, that's like 1,200 square kilometers over this intrusive complex. So it was a huge area. And then Golden Predator did a ton of baseline work, really good work, just collecting stream sediment samples all through this area. And then came back and followed up on that the next year in 2012 with just a light prospecting program. I would say that they were very enthusiastic about the Yukon, and I agree completely. They had a lot of properties, so as an optionee, I felt that maybe they could have gotten more, more focused. Everyone who options a property to a company wants them to focus on that. But in the follow-up work that they did do, they found grab samples on multiple targets that ran, 8-9 grams up to, on 2 targets. One was 152 grams with multiple ounce per ton samples, and the other target along the same trend called Gracie had 57 grams per ton. And so this is how it was handed back to us. And so that was, definitely not nails in the coffin. And then Einerson, so our 2 flagship programs are adjacent, Rogue and Einerson. Rogue has those intrusions. Einerson has very similar rocks to what you see in Nevada in terms of the Great Basin rocks that host the Carlin Trend. And we optioned that to a private company called Anthill Resources, who did, again, very extensive staking as part of the deal, very extensive baseline work, and follow up on multiple targets. And so that came back to us in 2017. And again, it was just the result of the way that the markets went. So these kind of landed in our laps. And since 2017, I've been trying to get the ball rolling again with various false starts. And it just took the primer, the kick of the gold upswing over the past summer, 2020, to finally renew interest. And, suddenly after years of not being able to give these things away, we had a bidding war on our hands. So that's
all right.
Just how it goes.
I got it. Okay, so it's good to know that there was other people's money put in, and you have the benefit of that work now. And so it's good to know you weren't just sitting on your hands before, that you did have a go before. That's very interesting. Now, I have to ask, though, on the one hand, yes, we're all aware of the Conrad and the Osiris, all these Egyptian discoveries that ATAC has made out there. On the other hand, we know about the road debacle. And, those poor guys at ATAC have just had, they keep making all these discoveries, but it keeps not working out for shareholders. And this is Eastern Yukon. It's very remote. If they can't get their road in, why would your projects do any better? That's a good question. And I think, those are fights with ups and downs, or not even fights, but discussions. And yeah, I think that they have some great rocks on their claims, and I'm excited to see what they can do there. On our project, we actually would access these from a different route. We are within about 30 kilometers, some of our targets, of the formerly producing Plata silver mine, and that was accessed by a heavy haul trail from the North Canal Road, where you have Fireweed Zinc and McMillan Pass, and so we would have a different access route out there altogether. All right. But right now, can you get in there with a drill rig, or would you have to do chopper supported drilling, or how would that work?
It is helicopter supported drilling. Yeah. So we have a base camp kind of nicely situated on a lake to service a couple of different targets. So we can take some fairly large float loads in there, and then we have a dedicated helicopter for the season, and that services will service the drill and the geological crews.
All right. Well, that's pricey, but I guess that's the way you have to start. I was wondering, though, about the programs and what the deliverables are. It says that you're going to drill about 600 meters in your presentation on both Einarson and Rogue. 600 meters is not a lot. If you're going to bother, setting up and getting a chopper in there and doing all that, that's 6 short holes or 2 or 3 more substantial holes. That's not a lot. What would investors get for this work if those holes are successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a bit of a case of under promise and over deliver. We do have on those specific targets, maybe 600 meters would give us a very good idea, but we've budgeted for a lot more, and we think we're going to be drilling a lot more. That was, that figure is kind of a holdover in the presentation from an earlier draft, which I guess it still is the current draft. But yeah, we're looking at drilling about a 3,000 meter program this year, and we do have the cash in hand to expand that further.
Yeah, I noticed that it says you have $6 million plus in working capital. That seems like more than enough for 600 meters or 1,200 meters on both.
We can definitely go bigger, and part of it is recognizing that they're early stage targets, and those are 2 specific targets that we're kind of looking at those smaller 600 meters on, we can easily turn up the gas, and we're hoping we will do so.
All right. Well, do you want to give us a little tease on what these targets are? What is it you're hoping to show there?
That sounds great. And actually, I'd like to put in a bookmark to address your expensive comments about the helicopter camp. I have some good thoughts on that that we can circle back to. But
sure.
To address the matter at hand, the Mars Northeast target is where we're going to start drilling, and it's really exciting. So this is on Einarson, and Einarson is, as I mentioned, it's situated in rocks that are very much analogous to the passive margin rocks that you see in the Great Basin in Nevada that hosts the Carlin Trends there, and you follow these up and you get into similar rocks that you mentioned, and very well with the tax property there. What's interesting, though, is that we are seeing sort of a different style of mineralization, a similar environment in terms of being a shallow sedimentary basin where you have these fluids percolating through and depositing what we're seeing as very large gold anomalies. But we're seeing what's more of a epizonal orogenic environment, so like a shallow orogenic deposit, maybe akin to what they have down in Fosterville, Bendigo, or what Newfound Gold is pulling out of Newfoundland recently. Actually, in 2019, I brought back some of those rocks from Mars Northeast after going out there, and Quentin pointed me. He's of course involved with Newfound, and he pointed me to their core. I went by their table in the core shack with their fantastic discovery hole, and apart from the visible gold everywhere, which would be nice, there were some stunning similarities between the rocks, and so it's nice to have that kind of to hang our hat on, whereas previously this hasn't been such a highly flaunted deposit type. And so, including when it was optioned out, so the private company that was there, they were focused, and I was out there with them, focused on Carlin style discoveries, and so we did walk over some pretty low hanging fruit in terms of other styles of mineralization, and having had the benefit of these doldrums to kind of sit and mull over these big data sets, started to notice a lot of other interesting things out there. And so Anthill did make the first discovery. That's the name of the private company, on the Mars Northeast zone. And then I was out there in 2019, and walking up the creek below it, there are just big quartz boulders, like meter scale quartz boulders, that are consistently assaying from a half gram to 7 grams, like usually multiple grams per ton, up to maximums of 23, 25 grams per ton. And so just the look of these boulders and the fact that this area had never been staked before. I'll just put in a little footnote on that point. Einarson was a Luxembourg-sized area, the initial project area that we started at. We've whittled it down to hold the ground more efficiently, but in this Luxembourg-sized area, there was one previous exploration project. It happened in the 1970s. They were looking for Mississippi Valley-type mineralization. They found a bit of it. They didn't come back. And otherwise, there are 0 min files. There are 0 previous claims on this giant package of what I see as very prospective rocks. And so back to Mars Northeast, walking up that creek, you see these boulders, and they're just, these big rusty quartz boulders that are assaying multiple grams per ton. And you know that no prospector has ever walked up that creek before, and it's exciting. And so Mars Northeast is, we've honed in on it a bit more. It's within a 3-kilometer zone of anomalous soils. We have this huge float train tracked up to a kill zone, basically. There are a series of kill zones there where the mineralization is so intense, or the elements in the minerals are so intense that you're just not getting vegetation on the surface, and so you just have these rusty soils there. And so I mean, it's a pretty, and that's one of 3 sort of established targets from the geochemistry.
And sorry, just the direction of ice flow is well known, and in your mind, it's clear that those boulders came from there, or could they have been transported farther?
That's a great question, and yes, in my mind, it's clear that those are coming quite locally. We do know the direction of ice flow. It's a nice constrained valley that the target is in, and the creek itself in the valley winds through the rocks, and so you're in these passive margin sediments, just shales, and down below some carbonates, and it's mostly pretty boring rock. I can see why, at least from a conventional sense, I can see why this area was not heavily prospected initially. Also, it's very far from the big rivers, but so it's hard to get to, or at least was. But walking up that creek, you can just see where it cuts through bedrock, heavy brittle deformation, ductile deformation, and alteration. And the alteration is coming from these same fluids that brought the quartz. And so this is, heat-related alteration of the rocks that are proximal to the vein system. And the overburden itself is very shallow, and where you get onto the actual, the heart of the anomaly there, you can see just from the homogeneity of the rocks that they haven't come far. There hasn't been much for mechanical transport and mixing of the rocks. So, and in one case, it's almost a subcrop. The boulder train that goes up the creek, it's about 3 kilometers long, at least as far as I've walked downstream, and it has multiple sources. But in one case, you can just see the frequency of boulders in the creek just intensifying, and then there's a big slab of them on shore. It's not quite subcrop, but it has not come far. All
right, so that's your first drill target at Einarson, but there's been no drilling on it before, right?
There has, not on that target. So Anthill
or the Mississippian rocks you mentioned before, but that was something else.
That's right, and that I hardly count that as drilling. It was they did, I think, 2 little winky drill holes with a guy with a backpack and a drill into the rock face there. But Anthill did drill 2 targets early on. One is called Mars, which we will very likely be revisiting. It's an extremely interesting target. They vectored in on a stream sediment sample that was coming from on the stream bank. They just did a channel sample and had about 30 meters of 1.6 grams per ton gold. Within that, there was about 5 meters of 7.1 grams. And they stepped back quite a ways and drilled it. They stepped back, now I say quite a ways. They stepped back 60 meters and drilled it, and got some, they got some numbers. It was 2 intervals of around 20 meters each within the hole of about 0.5, 0.6 over those. So, it's not nothing, but it's not going to grab any headlines. And they stepped out from there several hundred meters to the north and drilled along the same structure. And every time they hit it, they kept getting some interesting grades. And but I say interesting to a geologist, maybe not to an investor. But it is interesting how consistently they got it, and also they were getting very poor recoveries in the fault zone. So what the true grades are, I don't know, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it being anything other than what's reported. Though it is an interesting side note. And but with Mars Northeast, or sorry, with Mars, that's where this analog to what's going on in Newfoundland with Newfound Gold. If you look at their cross sections, and in Fosterville as well, what they're basing their exploration on, they're doing some pretty tight drilling to follow a pretty tight but extremely high grade zone down. And a lot of these structural systems are often thought of as a sheet of paper. You're looking for a fault underground, and you just have to drill through this sheet of paper to get this big system. But we're really more looking for like a line on a sheet of paper. And so if you step back 60 meters from your nice outcrop on surface, you might miss that line, and you're hitting, that sheet of paper has that low-grade mineralization. And there certainly, even from that outcrop, you can see that there's a big halo of lower-grade mineralization around this high-grade core. But if you miss that kind of high-grade conduit, you might miss your deposit.
So is that one going to be tested as well? You start closer to where you have the higher grade interval and see how far you can go?
It's not on the 100% sure list, but that's this is an idea that has come up over the past couple of weeks, and so we'll see what we get with the drill bit at Mars Northeast, and we could very well try to refine the results there, because it is an intriguing target. The other thing about Mars is that there is it was drilled, and again, this was the wild days of 2011, 2012, and so this was drilled basically. It was found with that stream sediment program, and the chip sampling was done, and then they put the drill on the outcrop, and or 60 meters back from the outcrop, and drilled quite down below it. And so then the soils data came back. So things were happening fast. And Mars is actually kind of off the main trend of a 4-kilometer golden soil anomaly that has soil samples up to 9 grams per ton gold. So whether we put a drill right on that discovery outcrop and try to trace it down, or whether we try to better understand this much bigger anomaly and the high grades coming off it, I imagine we'll be doing both, but it's one of many targets to look at out there.
All right. Switching over to Rogue, I noticed that there was some past drilling mentioned in your presentation, but it didn't mention any grades, so I presume that was also maybe interesting to geologists but not investors, or?
That one is actually interesting to investors, and I would think geologists too, I would hope anyway. So that is along the same trend that we're looking at. It's not on our ground, so it's not as exciting, but it is actually right. It was actually collared on our ground, and is within one of our anomalies. So, but the interval is just off our claim block, and they had within, and now if anyone wants, they can write me, and I could look for the exact numbers, because I can't quote them off the top of my head. At least for the broader interval, but it was on the order of 250 meters of some gold, but within that was 96 meters of 2 grams. And so these were headline numbers, and what happened though is they're drilling an intrusion related target, and that's where you have similar to Fort Knox, similar to Brewery Creek, you have these fairly small evolved intrusions that come up and sort of crack themselves and the rocks around them as they come up, and the fluids form these sheeted vein systems, and so you just get these granitic rocks or similar, and the Hornfels zone around them that are just cut with these sheeted veins that bear gold, and so you get these big, large bulk tonnage targets. And so that's what they were looking for, and essentially that's what they found with that 240 meter interception of this mineralized material. And just I can't quote the grade, so I won't try to guess what it was. It caught my attention anyway, not enough to jockey for position amongst all the other facts. But the 96 meters had two, so they were doing 5-foot assay lengths, and one of them was 76 grams per ton with visible gold in it. One of them was 26 grams per ton, and they were in these shear zones that had a bunch of sulfides, and so they weren't necessarily indicative of the overall grade of the sheeted veining that they were encountering in this much broader zone. And of course, this was drilled in 1996. Some other notable things happened in 1996. A lot of money fled the sector. I don't know the exact reason that this wasn't followed up, but Bre-X couldn't have helped. And the next year, there is a report that I dug up on this project where the geologists looked at this hole and they saw those two high-grade zones, and they just said, it's just a smeared interval, and walked away from it. So I dug out the old report and rebuilt the assay tables and looked at those zones and took out the high-grade zones, and you still have 400 parts per billion, or 0.4 grams, over 96 meters, which for an intrusive-related target is pretty interesting, especially on your first hole, especially within a broader 240-meter zone of the kind of mineralization that you're looking for. So it shows that this is a very fertile system. And one thing that has come out of our work along these similar targets that are along the same trend is that these high-grade zones aren't just some strange. I mean, undoubtedly there's some nuggeting effect, especially with visible gold in it, but these aren't some strange one-off. We are seeing them on the other targets as well, and we hope to get an idea of their lateral continuity. But when you go to these other targets and you're getting 152 grams in grab sample with visible gold in it, and you're getting 57 grams on another target of a buried intrusion, so there you have the kind of most fertile part of these intrusions, which is the carapace. Often you find kind of the remnants on the side. At the Gracie target at Rogue, it's basically just, we know it's there because of the alteration in the rocks and the geophysical signature, but it doesn't even daylight on surface. So the whole system is intact, which is very promising. But the takeaway from those higher grade samples is that these high grade zones in that historic hole aren't just one-offs. Those are, that's something. If you have 96 meters of 0.4 grams, plus you have these sweeteners of 76 grams and 26 grams over 5 feet, like that's a
right.
Pretty
Sorry,
massive.
just to be clear, Scott, you're saying these other samples confirm that it's not just that one zone, but you're talking about the grab samples, right? So there's no
I'm
drilling
talking
on
about
any
grabs.
other zones. You're
That's
seeing
right.
on surface signs that to you look like what was in that one drill hole.
Exactly, yeah. And so it's not just like, what the heck was this? What were they drilling into? We know what they were drilling into to an extent. We're seeing those sorts of rocks in our grab samples on the rest of the project.
All right. So are your targets for Rogue this year any extension of that one, or is it so far off the property line that one's gone and now you're just looking at similar targets on your property, or what are you shooting for exactly?
Our main two targets are distance from that one. We have basically a trend on the main block on that property. As I mentioned, it's a whole cluster of intrusions, and a lot of them with some very interesting rocks and numbers coming off them. But on that property, we have there are three intrusions in an east-west line, and that quite small inholding is on the easternmost intrusion, and we do have some really prospective grab samples and soil samples that extend well off that property. So that is very much a target for us. But our two primary targets are called the Valley and the Gracie Zone, and those are the next two to the west. One is a newly discovered by our past optionee Golden Predator stock that does daylight. And but just to give you an idea of how underexplored this area is, this stock is at least a kilometer across, maybe a few hundred meters to a kilometer wide. And it wasn't on any geological map. Just no one had noticed it before. And so, to be more concise, we do have two big targets that are not the inholding.
All right.
But that one's very interesting as well.
So who has that other land where that drilling was done? Is there any chance that you can pick that up as well, or is it locked up in other hands?
It got optioned out last summer. I think I've plugged the other company enough, so I'll let investors do their own homework there. But
all right.
But yeah, I definitely have my eye on it.
All right. So there's actually more than one or two. I was surprised. You actually have like a half a dozen other properties that you did bring into Snowline. Are any of those going to, I mean, there's some budget for some work on those, but I guess it's just surface work to see if you can define drill targets, or anything more expected from those other projects?
Yeah, we will. We'll do more work on them, and we don't want to spread our attention too thin. We have a pretty good exploration thesis going up in the Rogue and Einerson area, but we will be advancing some of them more aggressively than others because they are fairly close to drill ready, and with some pretty intriguing targets. One is Ursa, which is just next to Rogue and Einerson in the same sort of package of rocks. If you look at a geological map of the Yukon, you have the faults that cutting east-west across much of the central Yukon that attack resources kind of followed east to get to where they finally made their Carlin-style discoveries, and then those kind of horsetail out into this big regional fold, and the nose of that fold is punctuated by Rogue, and then the sort of center of that fold is covered by Einerson. Out on one of the limbs of the fold, there's a very intriguing gold and base metal anomaly called Ursa. And the scales and grades on that target are very intriguing to us. It's early stage, but we since we're going to be out there anyway, it makes a lot of sense for us to hit that hard, and it could conceivably see drilling later in the season if we figure that it merits it. And another project called Tosh in the southwestern Yukon, which I recently learned the British meaning of that term, so we might have to rename it to Shingerman, which is the initial name, but just too long to say. So that's the project that we've had kind of on the back shelf of our exploration portfolio as 18526, as my father and my private prospecting company. Tosh was staked in 1988, and we've kind of just piecemeal, just doing enough work to keep it in good standing, not quite enough to get people's attention, until 2012, when we had the funds from these other options to go out there and start hitting it really hard with big soils grids and everything else. And some very big anomalies came to the forefront there. Two separate 2-kilometer zones of gold and multi-element anomalies with golden soils up to 5 grams. And it really lights up in a geophysical survey that we did over a part of that project. So we're excited to get back out there, and it's not part of that Rogue Einerson exploration story or that province that we're looking at there, but it's in rocks not too dissimilar from what you see in the White Gold District. It's far enough south that it really was not seen in that stampede up to that part of the Yukon, and so we're excited to shore up our targets there, and that could also conceivably see a drill.
Alrighty. So for the two areas that you are planning to drill, when does the Truth Machine start turning, and when might we see results?
Very soon. Well, I guess it depends on lab backups for the results, but we are hitting it with the drill this month. Well, it's not June yet, but feels like it. On June 15th, we're set to mobilize the drill. So weather and other factors permitting, we'll be drilling shortly thereafter.
And sorry, one of them first and then to the other, or which one?
That's right. Yeah, so we're bringing in one drill to start at Mars Northeast, and we, if we really like what we see, we might camp that one there and bring another one in for drilling Rogue. But we'll play that by ear. But for now, the plan is to start at Mars Northeast. All
right, and the overall sort of business or corporate strategy here is you drill these and then hopefully get some excitement, raise some money, and then keep going after them yourselves? Or are you looking to do the prospect generator thing and show the worth and get some other people's money to come in and carry them forward? Or what's the plan?
We're not really following the prospect generators model. I mean, that was what we've been doing as prospectors for a long time. And so we're hoping to advance these. We're also not miners, so we have no, that's getting pretty far down the road. But we have a lot to test out there, and we have a lot of excitement for these projects. So we want to get out there and prove up some big deposits. And if that does mean at some point bringing in a partner, certainly there are majors interested in this area. When you look at the joint venture agreements with Attack and other majors kind of looking at the Yukon recently, it's good to see, and I certainly wouldn't close that door, but that's a discussion that we've yet to have and might be a little premature to have at this point. But we see the hallmarks of some very big deposits out there, and we want to prove that they're there.
Alrighty. Well, you've been a pretty good sport here on some tough questions, Scott. I appreciate that. I'll let you go, but I always ask everybody the skin in the game question before you go. If you want us to put our own hard-earned money into your stock, I don't own your shares yet. If I'm going to put my money into it, I want to know how much of your own money have you put into it?
I get it. That's a great question. And for me, it's really about the decades of my life that I put into it, including the geophysical survey I mentioned on Tosh. My dog got killed by a bear on that survey, and so I put literal blood.
Sorry, your dog was killed by a bear?
My dog was killed by a bear. Yeah, it was very tragic. Very not the great way to end a field season. Yeah, so all that to say that we've put many years into this. So as prospectors, as you pointed out, we got some payment for this upfront in this RTO transaction. So in that sense, you might say, oh, you have negative skin in the game, but no, I'm very committed to these projects, and I've put decades of my life into advancing them. So I'm really excited to be at this stage.
All right, fair enough. Well,
yeah.
Wow, I'm still, my mind is wrapped around that dog comment. Don't tell Rob McLeod, he would be so sad.
Okay.
All right, so I'll let you have the final word. You've been a good sport. I appreciate it. Interesting story. I look forward to seeing what the Truth Machine turns up. Any last word you want to share?
I think that that summarizes it well. We think we're onto a brand new gold district. It kind of feels like we're in Nevada in 1850 with all the stampeders going to the far coast and kind of walking right over some of the best rocks in the country. So we're happy to be out there and happy to have finally the resources to test these ideas.
All right. Well, good luck, Scott. And again, do keep us posted.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate the interview. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you for watching this edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tiggre. If you enjoyed or found value in what you just saw, and you're watching this on any sort of social media, please do hit the like button and the share link. Send this on to anybody you think might be interested. That helps us out a lot. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button as well. The number of subscribers helps us get more valuable content to you as well. On the subject of subscribing, I'll quickly say that if you're not a subscriber to our free weekly Speculators Digest, I encourage you to sign up. I promise if you do, we will not send you a flood of daily advertisements. You get one free weekly digest with original research not published anywhere else. Check it out at independentspeculator.com. Thank you and have a great day.